Okay, today we're going to discuss the story Jimmy Yellowhawk, and you'll find this story on pages 288 through 296. All right, so a little bit about the story. We learn right off the bat that the character motivation, the main character, Little Jim, he wants a new nickname. He has been named after his father. His father's name is James, and so since they both have the same name, his father is called Big Jim and he's called Little Jim. He feels like this name is for a small child and he wants to be seen as more mature. So when he tells his grandfather about this, his grandfather tells him an old story. So this family is a part of a Native American tribe, and the Lakota, and he's telling him like in the old days how a Native American man in the Lakota tribe would have gotten an old name. And this is about a boy whose his whole tribe is starving, and he has to go out and he has to hunt for food to save his family. And so he gets a name that is like a man name, right? And so little Jim really wants to do something like this to get a grown-up name. And if you think about what is his grandfather's motivation in telling this story, I think it's more that he's wanting to show little Jim how he can become more mature. But little Jim's idea is how can I do the same thing to get a manly name, right? So he decides he's going to do what the boy in the story did, and he's going to learn how to trap animals. And he thinks if he can trap something really big and ferocious, then he'll get a really manly name. So he tells his friend Shasha at school about it, and you'll notice that it says his friend was often teased about his reddish hair, and it said Shasha didn't seem to mind being teased at all like little Jim did. So often Shasha gets teased, and I guess his name Shasha means red, right? So he gets teased by other kids. He doesn't care about it, but little Jim does care about being teased, and Shasha should realize this since they're friends. But when little Jim tells Shasha about wanting to hunt animals and hoping to catch a bobcat or a wolf, Shasha laughs at him and he says, "Bobcats and wolves never get caught in traps, you dummy." So he calls him a dummy, which is really mean. Little Jim was hurt. And then Shasha says, "Oh, and all you'll probably get are rabbits." So, what can we learn about Shasha from the dialogue? He doesn't seem to be a very good friend. He's really kind of mean. He's not encouraging to his friend, right? And he doesn't really seem to notice or care that little Jim is hurt by his teasing. Okay, so little Jim goes out, and just like Shasha says, he first just catches rabbits, which his grandfather says is a good thing because rabbits are good for eating and you can sell the rabbit pelts for money. So his grandfather says it's good, but it doesn't accomplish little Jim's goal of getting a better name. He doesn't want to be called Rabbit Boy or something like that. So he goes out one day, and the author says there's a strong stink of skunk. So you'll notice, first of all, this is a lot more descriptive than if she just said there's a strong smell of skunk, right? And also, strong stink of skunk is alliteration and there's a rhyme at the end. So when you say it, you have to kind of slow down. You can't say it quickly, and it gives you a really good mental picture, right? So, as you can see in the story, he goes out and he ends up getting sprayed by the skunk and he smells horrible. He goes home and he's really ashamed, right? He stinks. They have to burn his clothes. But his grandfather and his dad, they don't say anything negative about the situation. They are only encouraging to him. His grandfather gives him more advice, right, about what he could have done. Um, but then his grandfather tells him another story, and this story, little Jim immediately knows it's about him, right? And so this story is an analogy. It's a story about little Jim. And he's kind of trying to show him that in the old way, if this had happened, then he might have gotten the name Skunk Face, right? Which is obviously not the kind of name little Jim wants. So his grandfather is patiently teaching him, and he's showing him that the old way is not always better. There would have been consequences, right? And so little Jim has learned a lot from trapping, right? He's becoming more mature. He's been doing this for months now, right? He's providing food for the family. He's earning a little money. So all these things are good things, right? And so he suggests the name Jimmy, right? It sounds a little bit more grown up, but it's still different than his father's name. All right, so a little later in the story, they have a discussion about mink, right? And a mink is a type of animal related to weasels. And I think it's the father that says, if there were still mink around. So this is a little bit of foreshadowing, right? They think it's pretty rare to see mink. They're probably not around. Okay, and they describe the mink as it looks like a beautiful animal, but it's very fierce and dangerous, right? So you can see a parallel here between Little Jim and the mink. They're both characterized by their abilities. Little Jim can do a lot trapping, even though he's young, right? And they're often underestimated, right? So there's similarities between the two. So we find out that Little Jim actually does catch a mink, and he says, I caught it in the same place I caught the skunk. And this is a bit of irony. So the place when he caught the skunk and he was sprayed, this is a great deal of shame for him. And now this is his place of greatest triumph, right? So this is the crisis of the story, the turning point when he catches the mink. All right, and the resolution of the story at the very end. So before, remember, his grandfather suggested the name Jimmy, but he hasn't really become Jimmy to everyone, right? And he really wants to be seen as a grown up. So when they go to sell the mink pelt, his father says to everyone, when the guy asked where he caught the mink, he said, my son, very loud for everyone to hear, my son Jimmy trapped it, he said with pride in his voice. And then the man they're selling it to says, you don't say, boy, you're really growing up. And he calls him Jimmy Yellowhawk. So at this point in time now, everybody knows him as Jimmy, and he has achieved what he wanted to achieve. He feels grown up and he's gotten a new name. All right, one thing I wanted to point out, this story relies heavily on dialogue to tell us about the characters. And so this is a more interesting and natural way to learn about people. The Bible also uses dialogue often in its historical narrative. So we learn about people through the way what they say and the way they say it. So the reason for this, Matthew 12:34, Jesus is talking about the Pharisees. These are the religious leaders of the time, and he has been healing people. He cast out a demon, and everything he does, the Pharisees try to go against him. Even though the things he's doing is good, they're constantly trying to fight against him, right? And he said, you brood of vipers. He calls them snakes. How can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So here it's saying that whatever is in your heart is going to come out of your mouth. So this is a reason that the Bible especially uses dialogue to tell us about people's heart, right? All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this story. Let me know if you have any questions.